The sun hanging over the Llano Estacado was not merely a celestial body. It was a judgment. It burned with a white-hot intensity that bleached the color from the sky and turned the endless sea of grass into a shimmering, silvered blur of heat. There was no shade here, not for 50 miles in any direction, save for the scant shadow cast by the canvas cover of the wagon Evelyn Pike sat in. Even that offered little mercy. The air inside was thick and still, smelling of dry pine, old sweat, and the acrid tang of horse fear. Evelyn shifted on the wooden bench, a movement that cost her a sharp intake of breath. Her ribs screamed in protest, a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from her left side where the skin had turned a mottled canvas of purple and sickly yellow. She kept her arms tucked tight against her body, hands folded demurely in her lap, hidden beneath the folds of her gray traveling dress. To anyone watching, she looked like a weary traveler, perhaps a schoolteacher or a widow seeking a new start. The dress was simple, devoid of lace or ribbon, but the cut was too fine for a farmer's wife. It was a remnant of a life she had fled 7 days ago. 7 days, 1 week. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like she was still holding her breath, waiting for the heavy bootsteps of Captain Silas Crowley to thunder on the floorboards behind her. The wagon hit a rut, jarring her spine. Evelyn bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. The pain was a grounding thing. It reminded her that she was alive, and more importantly, that she was away. She was no longer the ornament on Silas's arm, the woman he paraded at the officers' balls at Fort Conco. Nor was she the punching bag he used when the whiskey turned his blood to vinegar. "Almost there, ma'am," the driver called out. He was a withered old man with skin like cured tobacco, chewing on a piece of straw. He pointed a gnarled finger toward the horizon. Through the haze of heat and red dust, shapes began to coalesce. Low, squat buildings rose from the earth like stubborn weeds. A corral fence, gray and weathered, marked the boundary between civilization and the wild emptiness. A windmill creaked, its blades turning lazily in the hot wind. Half Moon Crossing. It was not a town. It was barely a settlement. It was a scar on the prairie, a trading post clinging to the edge of the Comanche territory like a barnacle on the hull of a ship. It was a place where the law of the United States government was a whispered suggestion rather than a rule. It was exactly where Evelyn needed to be. She needed to be invisible. She needed to be useful. And most of all, she needed to be nowhere. As the wagon rattled closer, the sounds of the outpost drifted toward them. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the lowering of cattle, the sharp, guttural rise of voices speaking Spanish, English, and tongues she did not recognize. High above the outpost, on a ridge of sandstone that overlooked the dusty main yard, a figure sat atop a paint horse. He was perfectly still, blending so seamlessly with the rock and the sky that a casual observer might have mistaken him for a trick of the light. Red Hawk watched the wagon approach with eyes that had seen 28 summers and winters on these plains. He did not move. The wind tugged at the black hair that fell loose around his shoulders, save for a single braid adorned with a hawk feather. His chest was bare, bronzed by the sun, crossed by the thin leather strap of his quiver. A strip of buckskin was wrapped around his waist, and moccasins reached his calves. He was not hostile, not yet. He was calculating. The white men called this place a trading post. Red Hawk knew it as a listening post. It was here that the Comanche came to trade hides for steel knives and coffee. But it was also here that they watched the tide of settlement. Every wagon that arrived brought something new. Disease, whiskey, lies, or sometimes just desperate people. He narrowed his eyes at the woman on the wagon. She sat too stiffly. The white women who came this far west were usually hardened, their skin leathered by the sun, their voices loud and rough. This one sat like a porcelain doll that had been cracked and glued back together. She was holding herself as if she feared she might shatter. Red Hawk nudged his horse with his knees. The animal picked its way down the rocky slope, silent as a shadow. He did not ride to greet them. He rode to witness. The wagon rolled into the yard of Half Moon Crossing and groaned to a halt in front of the main building. A sprawling structure of adobe and timber with a sign that simply read, "Provisions." Dust swirled around the wheels, coating Evelyn's skirts in a fine layer of red powder. "End of the line, ma'am," the driver said, jumping down and spitting into the dirt. "Unless you got a coin for the run to Santa Fe. This is as far as I go." "This is fine," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, though her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley." She waited for him to unload her small trunk, her only possession in this world aside from the clothes on her back and $11 tucked into her corset. Then she prepared herself for the descent. It should have been a simple thing, climbing down from a wagon, but her left side was a cage of agony. She placed a hand on the iron rail, taking a shallow breath. "Do not show weakness," she told herself. "Weakness attracts predators, and Silas is a predator." She swung one leg down, her foot searching for the wheel hub. As her weight shifted, a sharp, tearing pain shot through her rib cage, stealing her breath. Her vision grayed at the edges. She stumbled, her boot slipping on the iron rim. For a heartbeat, she was falling. She caught herself on the side of the wagon box, her arm wrenching painfully in the socket. A gasp escaped her lips, sharp and involuntary. She froze, waiting for the pain to subside, her forehead resting against the warm wood of the wagon. When she opened her eyes and looked up, she saw him. Red Hawk had ridden into the yard. He sat on his horse not 10 yards away. He had not moved to help her. He had not flinched. He was simply watching her, his dark eyes unreadable, void of pity. He looked at her not as a woman in distress, but as one might look at a lame horse assessing whether it would recover or if it was a burden. Evelyn straightened her spine, ignoring the fire in her side. She pulled her sleeves down, ensuring the cuffs covered her wrists. She met the Comanche warrior's gaze. It was an act of defiance she did not truly feel, but she refused to be looked at with that cold appraisal. He did not look away. His gaze lingered on her posture, the way she favored her left side, the tightness around her eyes. He saw too much. Evelyn turned from him, forcing her legs to carry her toward the porch of the trading post. The boardwalk thumped hollowly under her boots. Inside, the air was cooler but thick with the smell of stale tobacco smoke and frying grease. The main room was cluttered with barrels of flour, crates of ammunition, and bolts of calico. At the far end, behind a polished wood counter that looked entirely out of place, stood a man who could only be Tom Riley. He was a large man, his belly straining against a stained white shirt, his face red and shining with perspiration. He was currently shouting at a skinny boy who was trying to sweep the floor. "I told you, Jonah, if that cook is drunk again, you tell him he is fired. I do not care if he makes the best biscuits west of the Pecos. I cannot run a station when the customers are eating charcoal because he passed out near the fire." "He is gone, Mr. Tom," the boy, Jonah, said. His voice was quiet. He had the dark hair and skin that suggested mixed blood, part Mexican, part something else. "He took his bottle and walked out an hour ago." "Damnation!" Riley slammed a hand on the counter. "That is the 3rd one this month. Who is going to feed the drovers tonight? Me? I would poison a lot of them." Evelyn stood in the doorway, her heart hammered against her bruised ribs. This was it. Fate had opened a door, cracked and creaky though it was. She stepped forward, her chin lifted. "I can cook." The room went silent. Tom Riley blinked, looking over the top of his spectacles. The boy, Jonah, stopped sweeping. Even the flies seemed to pause their buzzing. "You?" Riley asked. Squinting at her, he looked her up and down, taking in the gray dress, the pale skin, the dust on her hem. "You look like you should be pouring tea in a parlor in Boston, ma'am, not skinning rabbits in a frontier outpost." "I am not from Boston," Evelyn said, And I can skin a rabbit, I can pluck a chicken, cure bacon, and bake bread that will not break a man's teeth. I can make a stew out of boot leather if the seasoning is right. It was a lie mostly. She had never skinned a rabbit in her life. Silas had servants for that, but she had watched. She had learned to cook because the kitchen was the one place Silas rarely entered. It had been her sanctuary. The heat of the stove was safer than the coldness of her husband's bedroom. Riley grunted, skeptical. "It is hot work, ma'am, 12 hours a day. The pay is $15 a month and room and board. The room is a cot in the back." "I will take it," Evelyn said quickly. Too quickly. She forced herself to slow down. $15 is acceptable, provided I have privacy. Riley laughed, a dry, barking sound. "Privacy. This is Half Moon Crossing, lady. The only privacy you get is inside your own head. But sure, the back room has a door with a latch, if that counts." A shadow fell across the threshold. Evelyn did not need to turn to know who it was. The air in the room shifted, becoming heavier, charged with a silent tension. Red Hawk walked in. He moved with a silence that was unnerving for a man of his size. He did not look at Evelyn. He walked straight to the counter, placing a small leather pouch on the wood. "Coffee," Red Hawk said. His voice was deep, vibrating in the quiet room. His English was accented but clear, stripped of unnecessary words. "And sugar." Riley's demeanor changed instantly. The bluster vanished, replaced by a wary respect. "Afternoon, Red Hawk. Good hunting." "Enough," the warrior replied. Evelyn stood her ground. Though every instinct screamed at her to retreat into the shadows, she could feel the warrior's presence at her back. It was a physical weight. She knew, without looking, that he was aware of her. He was aware of her fear. "So," Riley said, looking back at Evelyn, clearly eager to conclude their business now that a Comanche was in his shop. "You want the job? Apron is in the back. Dinner is at 6 o'clock. We have 10 hungry men coming in from the cattle drive, plus whoever else wanders in." "I will be ready," Evelyn said. She turned to leave, to head toward the back where the kitchen lay, and found herself face to chest with Red Hawk. Up close, he was terrifying. He smelled of sage smoke and leather and old rain. His eyes were dark obsidian, hard and impenetrable. He looked down at her, and for a second, Evelyn felt naked. She felt as though he could see through the gray wool of her dress, see the purple bruises on her arms, see the terror she was frantically trying to squash. He did not step aside. "The army," Red Hawk said. He was looking at Riley, but the words felt directed at her. "They are moving south." "More patrols?" Riley asked nervously. "Scouts," Red Hawk said. He looked back down at Evelyn. His gaze dropped to her hands, which were clenched into fists at her sides to stop them from trembling. "Looking for something, or someone." The blood drained from Evelyn's face. She forced her hands to relax. "Excuse me," she whispered. She stepped around him, careful not to brush against his bare skin. She felt the heat radiating from him. He watched her go, his head turning slightly to follow her movement until she disappeared behind the heavy curtain that separated the shop from the kitchen. Once she was out of sight, Evelyn leaned against the rough adobe wall of the kitchen. She was trembling violently now. The pain in her ribs flared hot and sharp. She pressed her forehead against the cool, dried mud of the wall. "He knows," a voice in her head whispered. "The Indian knows you are running." But Red Hawk did not know. He only suspected. To him, every white face was a potential threat, a harbinger of the blue-coated soldiers who burned villages and broke treaties. He saw a woman who did not belong, a woman with secrets, and in his world, secrets were dangerous. Evelyn pushed herself off the wall. The kitchen was a disaster. Cast iron pots were piled high with congealed grease. A sack of flour had spilled, dusting the floor in white. It smelled of burnt onions. It was perfect. It was a mess she could clean. It was chaos she could control. Unlike her life. Unlike the husband who had sworn to love and cherish her and had instead treated her as a possession to be broken. She removed her hat, placing it on a nail. She began to unbutton the cuffs of her dress, intending to roll up her sleeves, but stopped. Her fingers hovered over the fabric. She could not roll them up. Not here, not where anyone could see. The bruises on her forearms were shaped like fingers, Silas's fingers, burned into her skin from where he had grabbed her, shaking her until her teeth rattled because she had smiled too politely at a lieutenant. "You are mine, Evelyn. Do not forget who owns you." She shuddered, pushing the memory down into the dark cellar of her mind. She left her sleeves buttoned tight at her wrists. Despite the stifling heat of the kitchen, she would sweat, she would suffer the heat, but she would not let them see. Outside, on the porch, Red Hawk stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. He adjusted the strap of his quiver. "She stays," he asked Riley, who had followed him to the door. "She needs the work." Riley shrugged. "And I need a cook. Do not look at me like that, Red Hawk. She is just a woman, a fancy one at that. She will probably run back east before the first snow." Red Hawk did not answer. He looked out toward the southern horizon. The heat shimmer was playing tricks on the eye, making the distant mesas dance. But something else was out there, far away, miles across the sea of grass. A single rider appeared on a ridge. The distance was too great to make out a face, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The rider wore the dark blue of the United States Cavalry. He did not advance. He sat there, a dark speck against the burning sky, holding a standard that fluttered lazily in the hot wind. Red Hawk watched the rider. The rider seemed to be looking back, looking toward Half Moon Crossing. After a long moment, the soldier turned his horse and vanished behind the ridge, leaving only a puff of red dust hanging in the air like a suspended breath. It was not a patrol, it was a marker. Red Hawk looked back at the closed door of the kitchen. The white woman with the pain in her eyes and the fear in her walk had arrived, and now the blue coats were watching the horizon. He did not believe in coincidences. The wind was changing, bringing a storm that had nothing to do with rain. Red Hawk mounted his horse in one fluid motion. He would watch, he would wait, and if the woman brought the war to his doorstep, he would deal with her himself. Inside the kitchen, Evelyn Pike picked up a heavy iron skillet. It was heavy, solid, and real. She gripped the handle until her knuckles turned white. "I am here only to cook," she whispered to the empty room. A prayer and a promise, just to cook. But the bruises under her sleeves throbbed in time with her heart, a silent drumbeat warning that the past was never as far behind as one hoped. The kitchen of the Half Moon Crossing outpost was not merely dirty. It was a monument to neglect. It smelled of grease that had gone rancid 3 weeks ago, burnt onions, and the sour, unmistakable stench of rodent droppings. The cast iron stove, a behemoth of black metal that dominated the center of the room, was cold and covered in a layer of gray ash. The work table, hewn from rough pine, was littered with unwashed tin plates, a jar of molasses that had been left open to the flies, and a knife with a rusted blade stuck point first into the wood. Evelyn Pike stood in the center of this disaster and felt a strange, perverse sense of relief. Chaos she could understand, filth she could scrub away. This room, with its silent accumulation of grime, was an honest adversary. It did not lie to her. It did not promise to love her and then strike her across the face for smiling at a grocer. It was simply dirty, and it waited passively for her hands to make it right. She set her small trunk down in the corner, near the narrow door that led to the sleeping closet Tom Riley had promised her. She did not unpack. The instinct to remain ready for flight was a coiled spring in her gut, tight and painful. Instead, she removed her hat, placing it carefully atop her trunk. She found a warped bucket by the back door and walked out to the pump in the yard, filling it with water that smelled of iron and earth. Back inside, She worked with a feverish intensity. She scraped the congealed fat from the stove. She scrubbed the table with a brush she found under the sink, using sand and lye soap until the wood turned pale and raw. She swept the floor, raising clouds of dust that danced in the shafts of sunlight piercing through the gaps in the shuttered window. The physical exertion was a balm. It made her ribs ache with a dull, rhythmic throb that drowned out the sharper, more jagged pain of her memories. She focused on the simple mechanics of survival. Clean the pot, light the fire, sift the flour. Do not think about the past. Do not think about the future. The heat in the kitchen began to rise as the afternoon sun beat against the adobe walls. Evelyn felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine. Her gray traveling dress, modest and high-collared, felt like a suit of armor made of wool. She longed to strip it off, to douse herself in the cool water of the pump, but she dared not. Instead, she unbuttoned the cuffs at her wrists to allow a fraction of air to circulate, though she was careful to keep the fabric pulled down to her thumbs. She was reaching for a heavy sack of cornmeal on a high shelf when the door from the main trading room swung open. The sudden noise made her jump, her heart slamming against her ribs. She spun around, clutching the heavy sack to her chest like a shield. Tom Riley stood there, looking flushed and anxious, but it was the man behind him who sucked the air out of the room. Red Hawk had returned. The Comanche warrior seemed to fill the small kitchen, though he had not taken more than 2 steps inside. In the confined space, devoid of the open sky and the horse beneath him, he was imposing in a way that was almost suffocating. The smell of sage and wood smoke that clung to his skin overpowered the scent of the lye soap Evelyn had been using. His dark eyes swept over the room, noting the clean table, the swept floor, and finally resting on Evelyn with a look of profound irritation. "I told you, Red Hawk," Riley was saying, his hands fluttering nervously. "She is just a cook. We need someone to handle the food. The boys are complaining, and you know a hungry man trades poorly." Red Hawk did not look at Riley. He kept his gaze fixed on Evelyn. To him, she was an intrusion. Every white face that appeared at the crossing was another crack in the dam holding back the flood of settlers, soldiers, and thieves. He had tolerated Riley because the trade for ammunition and metal was necessary for his band's survival. But a white woman brought complications. Soldiers followed white women. Trouble followed them like flies on a carcass. He stepped closer to her. Evelyn forced herself not to retreat. She gripped the cornmeal sack tighter, her knuckles white. "This is Comanche land," Red Hawk said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating in the heavy air. "The treaty says the trading post stands. It says nothing of a settlement. It says nothing about bringing women to live here." "She is not settling," Riley argued, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. "She is working. Same as the smith. Same as me." Red Hawk ignored the trader. He looked directly into Evelyn's eyes, his expression hard, stripping away any pretense of civility. He saw the fear in her, the way she held her breath, and he despised it. It smelled of weakness. "Lady, you are here only to cook," the angry Comanche said, his words sharp and deliberate, cutting through the humidity of the kitchen. "Do not touch the horses. Do not ask questions. Do not go near the river after dark." It was an order, not a request. It was a boundary line drawn in the dirt. Evelyn nodded, unable to trust her voice. She turned away from him, needing to break that intense, judging stare. She moved to place the sack of cornmeal on the table. It was heavy, 50 pounds of dead weight. She had to lift it high to clear the edge of the newly scrubbed surface. As she raised her arms, the movement pulled at her dress. The unbuttoned cuff of her left sleeve, loosened by her earlier work and slick with sweat, slid down. It dropped past her wrist. It slid down her forearm, bunching at her elbow. The light from the window fell ruthlessly on her skin. The bruises were impossible to miss. They were not the formless blotches of a fall or a bump against a table. They were specific. They were terrifyingly precise. 4 oval marks on the top of her forearm, and a single, larger mark on the underside. They were the color of crushed plums and old bile, standing out starkly against her pale skin. They were the undeniable, unmistakable imprint of a man's hand, gripping with enough force to crush muscle against bone. Red Hawk stopped. The hostility in his face did not vanish, but it froze, suspended in a moment of jarring recognition. He knew violence. He lived a life defined by the bow, the lance, and the rifle. He had seen the aftermath of battle, the wreckage of bodies, but this was different. This was domestic savagery. This was the mark of a captor on a captive. His eyes locked onto the bruises. His breath hitched, a microscopic break in his stoic demeanor. The anger that had been directed at her presence shifted, twisting into a confused suspicion. Evelyn felt the cool air on her arm. She looked down and saw what he saw. A wave of cold nausea washed over her. The image of Silas's face red, contorted, his teeth bared in a snarl as he squeezed her arm flashed before her eyes. "You listen to me, Evelyn." The phantom sensation of his grip was so real she almost dropped the sack. She gasped, a sharp, wounded sound. Quickly, frantically, she yanked the sleeve down. She fumbled with the button, her fingers trembling so badly she could not fasten it. She abandoned the attempt and simply held the cuff tight against her wrist, turning her body away from Red Hawk, shielding her shame with her shoulder. She started, but her throat closed up. She swallowed, forcing down the bile. "I will not touch the horses." She refused to explain. She refused to offer a lie that he would see through, or a truth that would make her pathetic in his eyes. Red Hawk watched her back. He saw the way her shoulders hunched, a posture of defense he had seen in stray dogs expecting a kick. He turned to Riley, speaking in his own tongue, the Comanche language flowing like water over stones. He assumed the woman was deaf to his words, just another ignorant white settler. "Tuibit sinu," Red Hawk muttered, the word for stranger dripping with disdain. "She brings the smell of trouble. A beaten dog bites out of fear. Why did you bring this broken item here?" Evelyn froze. The words triggered a memory, sharp and clear. A dusty corner of the fort's laundry yard. Old wandering bird, a Comanche woman captured years ago, too old to run, who smoked a pipe and spoke to no one. No one but Evelyn, who had stolen quinine for the woman's feverish grandson. Evelyn turned slowly. She looked at Tom Riley, who looked baffled, and then at Red Hawk. "I am not a dog," Evelyn said. The words were Comanche. Her accent was thick, clumsy, the sounds shaped by a tongue used to English vowels, but they were intelligible. "I need only fire, water, and this room. I do not bite." Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Tom Riley's mouth fell open. He looked from Evelyn to Red Hawk as if the floor had suddenly turned into a ceiling. Red Hawk stood motionless. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes widened slightly, the pupils contracting. A white woman who spoke the people's tongue. It was impossible. It was unheard of. In all his years scouting the borders, he had never met a white settler who deigned to learn more than a few insults. "You speak," Red Hawk said, switching back to English, his voice dangerous and low. He took a step toward her, his hand instinctively drifting near the knife at his belt, not to draw it, but to ground himself. "How?" Evelyn held her ground. She kept her left arm pressed against her stomach. "There was a woman at the fort where I lived. She taught me a trade for medicine." "Which fort?" Red Hawk demanded. "Does it matter?" Evelyn countered. Her voice shook, but her chin was high. "I am not there anymore. I am here, and I have work to do." She turned her back on him completely this time, reaching for a heavy iron skillet and placing it on the stove with a loud clang that signaled the end of the conversation. Red Hawk stared at her spine. The suspicion in his mind exploded into a dozen different scenarios. A white woman who knew the language. A woman with bruises that spoke of torture. A woman who refused to name the fort she came from. Was she a spy? The army used scouts, but never women. Was she bait? Was she sent here to lure the Comanche into a false sense of security so the soldiers could surround the trading post? Or was she exactly what she looked like, a fugitive running from a violence that Red Hawk understood all too well? He did not trust her. He could not afford to trust her. The safety of his band, camped only 5 miles to the west, depended on his vigilance. He looked at Riley, his expression grim. "She stays," he said, "the permission granting no comfort. But I will be watching. If she signals the blue coats, if she brings sickness, if she causes trouble." He looked back at Evelyn. She was focused on the stove, but he saw the tension in her neck. She was listening to every word. "I will be the one to remove her from this land," Red Hawk finished. "And I will not ask for your permission. Riley." He turned and walked out, his moccasins making no sound on the floorboards. The door swung shut behind him, cutting off the glare of the sun. Riley exhaled a long, shuddering breath. "Lord have mercy, Mrs. Pike. You have a way of stirring the pot before you even light the fire. Where in God's name did you learn to speak Indian?" "I told you," Evelyn said quietly, picking up a knife to slice an onion. "I learned what I had to survive." She did not tell him that she had learned the language because it was the only secret she could have. Silas hated the savages. Speaking their words had been her private rebellion, a small, hidden room in her mind where he could not enter. 20 miles to the east, the sun was beginning to dip low, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. A group of 4 riders moved slowly along the dry creek bed. They were not moving with the casual pace of travelers. They were tracking. At the head of the group rode Captain Silas Crowley. He was a handsome man in a sharp, cruel way. His uniform was immaculate, despite the dust of the trail. He wore his blonde hair swept back, and his mustache was waxed to perfection. He looked every inch the officer and gentleman, save for the eyes. His eyes were pale blue, flat and lifeless as a winter sky. He pulled his horse to a halt and looked down at the ground. The earth here was hard-pan clay, unforgiving to the amateur eye. But Silas was not an amateur. He had spent 10 years hunting men who deserted the army. Hunting a woman was no different. "Tracks here, Captain," one of the men said. He was a scout, a scruffy man with tobacco juice staining his beard. "Wagon wheel, the left rear iron is loose. Make a wobble pattern in the dust." Silas nodded. He took a cigar from his pocket and lit it, the flame illuminating his face for a brief second. "She is heading for the crossing," Silas said softly. Smoke curled from his lips. "She thinks she can hide among the traders and the rats." "We can be there by tomorrow noon if we ride hard," the scout suggested. "No," Silas said. He smiled, a terrifying expression that did not reach his eyes. "Let her settle. Let her think she is safe. Let her think she has escaped me. It makes the lesson so much more memorable when reality arrives." He patted the neck of his horse. "She is my wife, and a wife belongs to her husband. That is the law of God and man." He flicked the reins. "We ride at dawn." Night fell over Half Moon Crossing like a heavy blanket. The heat of the day dissipated quickly, replaced by a chill wind that whistled through the cracks in the adobe walls. Evelyn lay on the narrow cot in the back room. The mattress was stuffed with corn husks that rustled every time she moved. The blanket was rough wool, smelling of dust. There was no lock on the door. She had pushed her heavy trunk against it, a flimsy barricade against the world, but she knew it would stop no one who truly wanted to enter. She lay on her back, staring up into the darkness. Her body ached with a profound exhaustion. Her hands were raw from the scrubbing, her feet swollen from standing for 6 hours cooking stew and biscuits for the drovers. She reached up and touched her right hand to her left arm, through the fabric of her nightdress. She traced the shape of the bruises Red Hawk had seen. She felt exposed. The Comanche warrior had looked at her not with the lustful leering of the soldiers, nor with the pity of the women at the fort. He had looked at her with a cold, clinical recognition. He had seen the violence written on her skin. Outside, far in the distance, she heard a sound. It was rhythmic, low, and steady. Thump, 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 thump. Drums. It was the sound of the Comanche camp. It was a sound that terrified the settlers, a sound that signaled war and death. But tonight, lying in the dark, Evelyn found a strange comfort in it. It was a heartbeat. It was the sound of something alive and unyielding out there in the dark. "Just a few weeks," she whispered to the empty room. "Please, God, just give me a few weeks of peace before he finds me." She closed her eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. In the silence between the drum beats, she could almost hear the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the east, bringing the storm she had tried so hard to outrun. The days at Half Moon Crossing began to bleed into one another, bound together by the scent of rising dough and the rhythmic chopping of wood. The kitchen, once a tomb of grease and neglect, had transformed. It was now a place of warmth and order, a beating heart in the center of the dusty outpost. Evelyn Pike had found a rhythm. She rose before the sun, when the sky was the color of a bruised plum, to stoke the fires. By the time the first light hit the adobe walls, the air was thick with the smell of roasting coffee beans and sizzling bacon. The men who passed through rough-handed drovers, weary soldiers on patrol, and the silent Comanche traders had stopped looking at her as a curiosity. They looked at her now as the source of the best meal within 50 miles. She moved through the space with an efficiency that surprised even her. The physical labor was a mercy. It left her too tired at night to dream of Silas Crowley's cold blue eyes or the sound of his riding crop tapping against his boot. "You are going to burn that if you stare at it any harder," a voice said from the doorway. Evelyn looked up, wiping flour from her cheek with the back of her hand. Jonah stood there, leaning against the doorframe with a lopsided grin. The boy was 17 years old, with the high cheekbones of his Comanche mother and the curly hair of his Mexican father. He was a creature of two worlds, accepted fully by neither, which perhaps explained why he had attached himself to Evelyn. "It is yeast, Jonah," Evelyn said, punching down the dough in the large ceramic bowl. "It requires patience, not staring." "It looks like magic," Jonah said, stepping inside. He grabbed a bucket from the corner. "Red Hawk brought a deer, a big buck. He is skinning it by the corral. He said the liver is for you." Evelyn paused. "For me?" "He says it makes the blood strong," Jonah said, his eyes twinkling. "He thinks you look like a gust of wind could blow you back to St. Louis." Evelyn felt a flush rise to her neck, though she told herself it was from the heat of the stove. She had felt Red Hawk watching her over the past 2 weeks. He was a constant, silent presence. He rarely came into the kitchen when the white men were eating, preferring to take his coffee standing on the porch or by the corral. But his eyes followed her whenever she crossed the yard to fetch water or hang laundry. "Tell him I am stronger than I look," Evelyn said, turning back to her dough. "You can tell him yourself," Jonah said, darting out the door before she could protest. "I am fetching water." The interactions with Red Hawk were a dance of avoidance and awareness. He frightened her, not because he was violent, but because he was intense. He was nothing like the blustering, loud men she was used to. He was stillness. He was observing. Later that afternoon, the kitchen was empty. The lunch rush had passed, and the evening stew was simmering quietly on the back burner. Evelyn needed the heavy cast-iron skillet that Tom Riley insisted on keeping on the highest shelf, a place that required a ladder she did not have. She dragged a sturdy wooden chair over to the cupboards, hitching up her skirts. She climbed onto the seat. She stretched her arm up, her fingers brushing the cold iron handle, but it was just out of reach. She rose onto her tiptoes, straining upward. As she stretched, her gray dress pulled up, revealing her ankle and the beginning of her calf above her worn boots. It was a small thing, a few inches of pale skin and white stocking, but in the rigid world she came from, it was an intimacy. The back door creaked. Evelyn froze. She turned her head, losing her balance for a fraction of a second before steadying herself against the shelf. Red Hawk stood in the doorway. He held a burlap sack in one hand. He was not looking at her face. His gaze was fixed on her ankle, on the curve of her leg exposed by the lifted hem. The air in the kitchen seemed to vanish. He did not look away immediately. There was no leering in his expression, no crude hunger like the soldiers at the fort. Instead, there was a sharp, startled appreciation, followed by a darkening of his eyes that Evelyn felt in the pit of her stomach. It was a look that acknowledged she was a woman, a creature of flesh and blood, not just a fixture of the kitchen. Heat rushed through Evelyn, hotter than the stove. She hurriedly dropped her heels, the skirt falling back into place, covering her. She grabbed the skillet with both hands, using the momentum to mask her trembling, and stepped down from the chair. When she turned around, clutching the heavy pan against her chest like a shield, Red Hawk had turned his back to her. He was placing the sack on the table. "Venison," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "Fresh." "Thank you," Evelyn managed to say. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. He turned then, and for a heartbeat, they just looked at each other. The kitchen was silent save for the bubbling of the stew. Evelyn realized with a jolt that she was not afraid he would hurt her. She was afraid because, for the first time in years, her heart was racing not from terror, but from a strange, unfamiliar tension. Red Hawk's eyes dropped to the skillet she was clutching so tightly, then moved to her hands. The bruises on her wrists had faded to a sickly yellow-green, but they were still visible. His jaw tightened. The moment of charged awareness shattered, replaced by the cold anger she had seen on his face the first day. But this time, the anger did not seem directed at her. "Do not climb," he said abruptly. "Ask Jonah, or ask me." Before she could answer, he turned and walked out, his braids swinging against his bare back. Red Hawk strode toward the corral, his mind a turmoil he did not appreciate. He hated the way the white woman made him feel. He hated the softness of her skin that he had glimpsed, because it reminded him of things that could be easily broken. He remembered his sister, Blue Jay. She had been soft, too. She laughed easily. And then a patrol of bluecoats had caught her foraging near the river. They had broken her. They had left her body in the mud like refuse. Since that day, Red Hawk had viewed white women with a mixture of hatred and indifference. They were the reasons the soldiers came. They were the excuse the government used to steal land, protect the women, the politicians said, while they slaughtered Comanche children. But Evelyn Pike was different. She carried the marks of a war he understood. He had seen the bruises. He knew the shape of them. A man had done that. A man who claimed to own her. Red Hawk found himself gripping the rail of the corral fence until the wood groaned under his hand. He wanted to find the man who had put those marks on her. The violence of the desire surprised him. He told himself it was just his warrior's instinct to protect the weak. But when he saw her ankle, slender and pale, his blood had run hot. It was not a pity. It was wanted. And that was dangerous. A Comanche warrior could not want a white woman, especially one who was clearly running from a past that would eventually come looking for her. That evening, the danger of their proximity heightened. The trading post was full. A group of cowhands moving a herd north to Kansas had stopped for supplies and whiskey. The main room was loud with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the scraping of boots. Evelyn was moving between the tables, carrying a tray of bowls filled with the venison stew. The noise was overwhelming. Men shouted for more bread, for more beer. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on her task, trying to make herself invisible. As she passed the corner table where Red Hawk sat with two other Comanche scouts, a drunken cowboy stumbled backward, nearly knocking the tray from her hands. Evelyn gasped, the heavy tray tilting dangerously, hot soup sloshed over the rim. A hand shot out, steadying the tray. It was Red Hawk. He had moved with the speed of a striking snake. His hand gripped the edge of the wooden tray, and in doing so, his fingers brushed against her forearm. The contact was electric. His skin was calloused and hot, radiating a dry, intense warmth. Her skin was cool and damp with a nervous sweat. The contrast was shocking. For a second, the noise of the room faded into a dull roar. Evelyn looked down at his hand, large and dark against her pale arm. She felt the strength in his fingers, the controlled power. He did not let go immediately. He held the tray steady, his thumb pressing lightly against the sensitive skin of her inner arm, right over the fading bruise. Evelyn looked up. Red Hawk was looking at her. His face was impassive, but his eyes were dark pools of intensity. He was breathing slowly, but she could see the pulse jumping in the hollow of his throat. "Careful," he said. The word was low, meant only for her. Evelyn's breath hitched. She stepped back, breaking the contact. The loss of his touch left her skin tingling. "Thank you." She hurried away toward the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She placed the tray on the counter and gripped the edge of the wood, closing her eyes. She was terrified, not of the drunken cowboys, not even of Silas at that moment. She was terrified of the way her body had leaned into Red Hawk's touch. She was a woman who had learned that a man's touch meant pain. She had learned to freeze, to endure, but just now, she had not wanted to pull away. That night, she lay in her bed and listened to the wind picking up outside. She heard the heavy thud of boots on the porch and flinched, pulling the quilt up to her chin. But then she heard the soft, rhythmic tread of moccasins pacing the perimeter of the building. Red Hawk was on watch. Her muscles relaxed. The fear receded. It was a confusing, treacherous comfort. 2 days later, the sky turned the color of sulfur. It started in the morning with a strange stillness. The birds stopped singing. The horses in the corral huddled together, their tails flicking nervously. By noon, the horizon had disappeared, swallowed by a towering wall of brown and gold. "Sandstorm," Tom Riley bellowed, running to bolt the shutters on the main windows. "Get everything inside. It is going to be a bad one." Evelyn was in the backyard, taking dried herbs down from the line. She worked frantically, the wind whipping her skirts around her legs. The air turned gritty, the taste of dust filling her mouth. Within minutes, the sun was blotting out. The wind roared like a living thing, screaming through the gaps in the fence. Sand stung her face like 1,000 needles. She grabbed the basket of herbs and turned toward the kitchen door. The wind slammed into her, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, the basket flying from her hand. The world was a swirling vortex of blinding dust. She could not see the door. She could not see the house. Panic seized her. She was disoriented, coughing, her eyes burning. Suddenly, a hand gripped her arm. It was not a rough grab. It was an anchor. Red Hawk emerged from the brown haze. He had a scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. His eyes narrowed to slits against the sand. He did not speak. He pulled her, his grip firm and undeniable. He dragged her toward the building. Shielding her body with his own, he kicked the kitchen door open and shoved her inside, following her and slamming the heavy wood shut against the howling wind. The sudden silence of the room was jarring. The air was still filled with fine dust, hanging in the dim light like golden fog. Evelyn stumbled back against the wall. Coughing, Red Hawk stood before her, his chest heaving. He pulled the scarf down from his face. He was shirtless, his skin coated in a fine layer of red dust, sweat cutting tracks through the grit. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No," Evelyn gasped, wiping her eyes. The wind." She looked up at him. They were standing close, too close. The small kitchen felt suddenly microscopic. The storm raged outside, rattling the shutters, isolating them from the rest of the world. Red Hawk stepped closer, crowding her space. He reached out, and for a second, Evelyn flinched, expecting a blow. Red Hawk froze. His hand hovered in the air. He saw the flinch. A flash of pain crossed his eyes, not physical pain, but something deeper. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. His fingers were gentle, incredibly gentle. "I am not him," Red Hawk said. His voice was a low growl, fierce and protective. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes wide. She knew who he meant. He meant the man who had given her the bruises. "I know," she whispered. She looked at his chest, at the powerful muscles, the faint scar running over his ribs, the dark hair dusted with sand, the smell of him rain. Sage and male sweat filled her senses. Red Hawk placed his hand on the wall beside her head, leaning in. He was not touching her, save for the heat radiating from his body, but he was surrounding her. "You should not be out there," he said. "The land kills the careless." "I was trying to save the sage," she said, the excuse sounding foolish even to her. "Let the sage die," Red Hawk said, his gaze dropping to her lips. "You survive." The tension in the room was a physical weight. Evelyn felt a pull in her chest, a yearning that terrified her. She wanted to step forward. She wanted to press her face against his dusty chest and feel his heart beat. She wanted to be held by arms that would not crush her. The fire in the stove crackled, a loud pop in the heavy silence. Red Hawk pulled back. He took a deep breath, his nostrils flaring, as if waking from a trance. He stepped away from the wall, putting distance between them. "Stay inside," he said, his voice tight, "until the wind dies." He turned and moved to the window, peering out through the cracks in the shutter, his back rigid. Evelyn stood against the wall, her legs trembling, touching the spot on her forehead where his fingers had brushed her skin. The storm lasted for 3 hours. When it finally died down, leaving the world covered in a foot of red drift, the dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. The kitchen fire burned that evening, but Evelyn felt a different fire. She caught herself looking at the door, waiting for him. And when he came in to get coffee, the silence between them was no longer empty. It was heavy with things unsaid. But reality has a way of intruding on the suspended moments of the frontier. 2 days after the storm, an older Comanche warrior arrived at the outpost. He was a man named Grey Wolf, his face a map of wrinkles, his hair entirely white. He sat on the porch with Red Hawk, speaking in low, urgent tones. Evelyn was sweeping the porch, trying to be unobtrusive, but she understood enough of the language now to catch the drift. "The blue coats are moving the lines," Grey Wolf said, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "They say all the people must go to the reservation at Fort Sill. No more hunting, no more wandering." "I will not go," Red Hawk replied, his voice hard as flint. "You cannot fight the tide, nephew," Grey Wolf said. He glanced at Evelyn, his dark eyes sharp and knowing. "And you cannot protect things that do not belong to us. The white woman. She is a tether. She makes you slow. She makes you look at the ground instead of the horizon." Evelyn stopped sweeping. Her heart went cold. She understood the implication. By being here, by letting Red Hawk protect her, she was endangering him. She was a distraction in a time of war. To the Comanche, she was the enemy, or at best, a liability. Red Hawk looked at Evelyn. He did not defend her to the elder. He simply said, "She cooks. She is useful." The dismissal stung, even though she knew he said it to protect her position. She went back inside, her hands gripping the broom handle until her knuckles turned white. She was foolish to think there could be anything else. He was a warrior fighting for his dying way of life. She was a runaway wife. There was no bridge long enough to cross that divide. But the final blow came that evening. Jonah returned from a trip to the nearest town, a settlement 20 miles east called Dust Creek. He rode his mule into the yard, his face pale beneath the dust. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, kneading dough with a ferocity that spoke of her inner turmoil. "Evelyn," Jonah said. He did not use the playful tone he usually employed. Evelyn looked up. "What is it? Jonah, did you forget the sugar?" "No," Jonah said. He twisted his hat in his hands. "I heard men talking at the saloon in Dust Creek." Evelyn went very still. "What men?" "Strangers," Jonah said. "One of them was asking questions. He was asking about a woman. He said she was tall, with brown hair." He paused, looking at Evelyn's hands. "He said she always wears gloves or long sleeves to hide her hands." The room seemed to tilt. The flour on the table looked suddenly like snow, cold and stark. "Did he say who he was?" Evelyn whispered. "He did not give a name," Jonah said. "But he wore a long coat, and he had eyes like ice." "Silas." He was close. 20 miles was nothing, a half-day's ride. The old panic rose up, a black tide threatening to drown her. Her instinct screamed at her to run. "Pack the trunk, steal a horse, go west, go anywhere." She looked around the kitchen. She looked at the clean table, the bubbling pot of stew, the warmth of the fire. She looked through the window and saw Red Hawk standing by the corral, checking the hoof of his paint horse. If she ran, she would be running forever. Silas would never stop. He would chase her to the ocean if he had to. But here she had a job. Here she had Jonah. Here she had a man who had pulled her out of a sandstorm and looked at her bruises with anger at the perpetrator, not disgust at the victim. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron. The trembling in her fingers stopped. "Thank you, Jonah," she said. Her voice was steady. "Are you going to leave?" Jonah asked, his eyes wide with fear. "If you leave, the biscuits will be terrible again." Evelyn looked at the boy. She looked out the window at the warrior. "No," Evelyn said. She reached for the knife to chop the carrots. "I am not running. I have work to do. Dinner is at 6 of the clock." She chopped the carrot with a decisive thwack. She was done running. If Silas Crowley wanted her, he would have to come to Half Moon Crossing, and this time she would not be the only one waiting for him. The whispers began as a low hum, indistinguishable from the buzzing of the horseflies that plagued the porch of the Half Moon Crossing. But soon they sharpened into words that stung worse than any whip. News traveled across the Llano Estacado faster than a brush fire, carried by the mouths of bored cowboys and wind-burned traders. By the 4th week of Evelyn's stay, the outpost had become a theater of gossip. Men she had never met looked at her with knowing, greasy smiles. They watched her knead dough with eyes that stripped her bare, and their conversations halted abruptly whenever she walked past, replaced by loud, performative coughing or snickers. "That is Crowley's leaves," a drover muttered one evening, loud enough for Evelyn to hear as she collected empty plates. He leaned back in his chair, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. "I heard she ran off because she could not handle a real man. Now she is out here cooking for a savage. Maybe she likes the savage." His companion leered, sloshing whiskey onto the table. "Maybe she likes being passed around like a bottle of cheap rye." Evelyn gripped the stack of tin plates until her fingers ached. She walked back to the kitchen, her spine rigid, her face burning with a humiliation that felt like acid. She did not cry. Tears were a luxury she had lost years ago. Instead, she scrubbed the plates with furious energy, imagining she was scrubbing the voices out of her head. The social judgment crystallized into a physical form 2 days later in the shape of Reverend Ezekiel Thorne. He was a gaunt man with a face like a dried apple and a collar that looked too tight for his neck. He had arrived with a supply wagon, intending to preach salvation to the heathens. But he found a different target for his righteousness. Evelyn was sweeping the front steps when Thorne cornered Tom Riley near the water trough. "It is an abomination, Mr. Riley," the Reverend intoned, his voice carrying clear across the yard. "You harbor a woman of loose morals. A runaway wife is bad enough, but one who consorts with the heathen red man, she is a Jezebel. You invite the wrath of the Lord, and more practically, the wrath of the United States Army. You must cast her out before she brings ruin upon this establishment, Evelyn froze. The broom handle felt rough against her palms. She looked at Riley, hoping for defense. Riley shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. He adjusted his spectacles and wiped sweat from his brow. She is a good cook, Reverend, and Red Hawk? Well, Red Hawk keeps the Comanches from raiding us. It is a delicate balance. It is a sinful balance. Thorn spat. Send her away, or decent folk will stop trading here. Evelyn did not wait to hear Riley's capitulation. The look in the trader's eyes, a mixture of greed and fear, told her enough. She was a liability. She dropped the broom. The sound of wood hitting the dry earth was final. She marched to the back room, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She dragged her trunk out from under the cot. Her hands shook as she threw her 2 spare dresses into it. She did not know where she would go. West, perhaps. Or maybe she would just walk into the desert until the heat took her. Anything was better than being the source of scorn. Better than waiting for Silas to arrive and drag her back to hell amidst the jeers of these strangers. She hauled the trunk out the back door toward the stables. The sun was beating down, heavy and merciless. She found an old gray mare that Riley let her use for hauling water and began to fumble with the heavy leather saddle. The cinch is twisted. The voice came from the shadows of the hayloft. Evelyn jumped, dropping the stirrup. Red Hawk stepped out into the shaft of sunlight cutting through the dust motes. He moved with that unnerving silence, a predator who had decided to reveal himself. He looked at the saddle, then at her flushed, desperate face. "I do not care," Evelyn snapped, grabbing the cinch and yanking it hard. The horse pinned its ears and sidestepped. "It will hold long enough for me to leave." Red Hawk moved forward. He did not touch her, but he placed a hand on the horse's neck, calming the animal instantly. He stood between Evelyn and the open door. A solid wall of bronze skin and leather. "Where will you go?" he asked. His voice was devoid of mockery. It was a simple, tactical question. "Away," Evelyn said. She tried to shove past him to reach the stirrup, but he did not move. "Get out of my way. Red Hawk, I am done. I am poison to this place." "You heard the preacher. You heard the men. I bring nothing but trouble." "Trouble follows the men who chase you," Red Hawk said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "It is not carried in your blood." "It does not matter," Evelyn cried out, the dam breaking. Her voice cracked, high and jagged. "They look at me like I'm a whore. They think I am with you. They think I am dirt. I cannot stay here and wait for Silas to come and prove them right." "Let them talk," Red Hawk said. "The coyote howls at the moon, but the moon does not fall." "I am not the moon," Evelyn shouted. She was shaking now, vibrating with the force of her shame. "I am just a woman who is tired of being hated for things I did not choose." Red Hawk looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes. "If you leave," he said, his voice dropping to a rumble, "you die. The heat, the thirst, or the men who hunt you, they will find you alone on the prairie. Is that what you want to make it easy for them?" Evelyn stared at him. The fight drained out of her, leaving her hollow. She leaned her forehead against the rough leather of the saddle, closing her eyes. "I just want it to stop," she whispered. "Then stop running," Red Hawk said. He reached out, taking the reins from her hand. He did not brush her skin. "Go back to the kitchen, cook the stew, make them eat your food while they speak their lies. It is a better revenge than dying in the dirt." He turned the horse away, effectively ending her escape. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, breathing in the smell of hay and horse sweat. Then, slowly, she turned and walked back to the house. But the day was not done with her yet. 2 hours later, the kitchen was a chaotic inferno. Evelyn was trying to make up for lost time, rushing to prepare the evening meal. A large pot of water for boiling potatoes sat on the edge of the stove. As she turned to grab a cloth, her boot caught on an uneven floorboard. She pitched forward. Her hip slammed into the stove, and the pot wobbled, then tipped. Scalding water cascaded down. Evelyn screamed, twisting her body away just in time to save her legs from the worst of it. But the water soaked the front of her dress and splashed over her left boot. The heat was instantaneous and shocking. "Mrs. Pike!" Jonah yelled from the yard, dropping his armload of wood. "I am fine," Evelyn gasped, though tears of pain were already springing to her eyes. "Do not come in. It is just water." She could not let anyone see her peel the wet clothes off. She limped hurriedly into the small storage room behind the kitchen, a cramped space filled with sacks of flour and dried chilies, and kicked the door shut. Her hands shook violently as she unbuttoned her dress. The wet wool was heavy and steaming. She peeled it off, letting it fall to the floor in a sodden heap. She sat on a crate, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, wearing only her thin cotton chemise and her bloomers. The door opened. Evelyn shrieked, snatching her arms across her chest. Red Hawk stood there. He held a small clay jar in his hand. He had heard the scream, heard the crash, and his warrior's instinct had propelled him inside with a salve for burns. "Jonah said you burned—" He stopped. The storage room was dim, lit only by the light spilling from the kitchen, but it was enough. It was enough to see everything she had hidden beneath the high collars and long sleeves. The chemise was thin, clinging to her damp skin. It revealed the bruises on her arms. Yes, but it revealed so much more. Along her left side, tracking down her ribs, was a map of violence. Old bruises, yellow and fading, overlaid with newer ones that were dark purple. But worst of all was the scar on her hip, visible where the bloomers rode low. It was a jagged, ugly line, pink and raised, the kind of scar left when skin splits against a hard edge like the edge of a stair. Red Hawk did not move. He did not breathe. He stared at her body, not with lust, but with a dawning, horrific realization of the magnitude of her suffering. He had seen warriors cut down by sabers who bore fewer marks than this woman. "Get out," Evelyn whispered. She did not have the strength to shout. She curled in on herself, trying to hide the evidence of her shame. "Please." Red Hawk stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The space became instantly intimate, charged with the scent of dried peppers and the heat of two bodies. He ignored her command. He walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Who?" he asked. The word was heavy, a stone dropped into a deep well. His voice was choked with a rage so profound it sounded like grief. "Who did this to you?" Evelyn looked up. She saw his face. The stoicism was gone. In its place was a raw, open fury that terrified her, yet compelled her to speak. "My husband," she said. The truth hung in the air, ugly and naked. "Captain Silas Crowley." Red Hawk knelt on one knee before her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his bare chest. "The soldier chief, he is a hero to them," Evelyn said bitterly, gesturing vaguely toward the main room where the white men drank. "To the army, to the traders, but at home, if the soup was cold, if I smiled at the wrong person, if I merely existed on a day he would be angry." She touched the scar on her hip. "He kicked me down the stairs of the officers' quarters because his boots were muddy, and he blamed me for the rain. I lay at the bottom for 3 hours because I could not move. He stepped over me to get a drink." Red Hawk's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. His hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists. "I will kill him," Red Hawk said. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, as inevitable as the sun setting. "No," Evelyn said. She straightened, forcing herself to look him in the eye. "I do not want you to kill him for me. I do not want to be saved. Red Hawk, I spent 5 years waiting for a savior. I prayed to God. I prayed to my father's memory. No one came." She took a breath, her chest heaving beneath the thin cotton. "I do not want a hero. I want to own my own skin. I want to decide who touches me. I want to be the one to say stop or go." Red Hawk looked at her. The murderous rage in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a deep, somber respect. He saw the steel spine beneath the bruised skin. He opened the clay jar. A pungent, earthy smell of crushed bear root and fat filled the small room. "The water," he said softly. "It scalded your arm." He did not reach for her. He held his hand out, palm up, the salve glistening on his fingers. He waited. Evelyn looked at his hand. It was a large hand, capable of killing, capable of drawing a bow that no white man could pull. But it was waiting. Slowly, tentatively, she extended her arm. "You may," she whispered. Red Hawk moved with agonizing slowness. His fingers brushed her wrist first. His skin was rough, calloused from a life of war and hunting. But his touch was light as a feather. He applied the salve to the red, angry skin where the water had splashed. The sensation was overwhelming. The cool salve, the hot skin, the rough texture of his fingers against her inner arm. Evelyn's breath hitched. She watched his face as he worked. He was focused entirely on her, his eyes tracking the motion of his own hand as if performing a sacred rite. He moved higher, past the burn, tracing the outline of an old bruise on her bicep. He did not look away from the mark. He acknowledged it. He honored the pain it represented. "He broke you," Red Hawk murmured, his voice rough. "Or he tried." "He did break me," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "I am just trying to put the pieces back together." Red Hawk looked up. Their faces were inches apart. In the dim light, the rest of the world fell away. There was no trading post, no gossip, no Silas. There was only the smell of sage and the heat of his body. "You are not broken," Red Hawk said. "You are a blade that has been forged in too hot a fire. You are sharp, Evelyn." It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it on his tongue, wrapped in his accent, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. Evelyn felt a pull, a magnetic gravity drawing her toward him. She wanted to lean forward. She wanted to press her mouth against the scar on his shoulder. She wanted to know if his skin tasted like the rain he smelled of. Red Hawk saw the desire in her eyes. His pupils dilated. His hand lingered on her arm, his thumb sweeping almost imperceptibly against her skin. The air between them crackled with a sexual tension that was thick and heavy. But he stopped. He pulled his hand back, breaking the contact. He stood up, towering over her in the small space. "When you want a man to touch you," Red Hawk said, his voice low and husky, "because the fire is in your own blood, and not because you are afraid to say no, you will be the one to speak." He placed the jar of salve on the crate beside her. "He will not touch you again," Red Hawk promised. "Not while I draw breath." He turned and left the room. Evelyn sat there in the semi-darkness, her skin burning where he had touched her, her heart racing with a mixture of terror and a wild, blooming hope. That night, the wind died down, leaving the outpost in a suffocating silence. Evelyn lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. Her body felt strange to her. For years, her body had been a source of pain, a traitor that betrayed her weakness. Tonight, it felt alive. She could still feel the ghost of Red Hawk's fingers on her arm. She turned over, burying her face in the pillow. She was ashamed of the heat in her belly. Was she trading one dependency for another? Was she just looking for a stronger protector to stand between her and Silas? No, she thought. Silas took, Red Hawk asked. The distinction was small, but it was everything. The peace, fragile as it was, shattered 2 days later. It was late afternoon when a mule stumbled into the yard. The man slumped over its neck was barely conscious. He was an independent trader named O'Malley, the same man who had driven Evelyn's wagon weeks ago. Jonah ran to catch the mule as O'Malley slid from the saddle, hitting the dust with a wet thud. "Get water!" Riley shouted, running out from the store. Evelyn abandoned her stove and ran to the porch. She watched as they turned O'Malley over. His face was a ruin. One eye was swollen shut, his lips split, and his shirt was dark with dried blood. Red Hawk appeared from the corral, pushing through the gathering crowd. He knelt beside the man. "Who did this?" Red Hawk demanded. O'Malley coughed, spitting red dust and blood. He looked up, his good eye rolling wildly until it found Evelyn standing on the porch. "He is coming!" O'Malley wheezed. He pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn. "The captain, he stopped me on the trail, 10 miles east, asked if I drove a woman here." Evelyn gripped the porch railing. The world swayed. "I did not tell him," O'Malley groaned. "I swear. But he has men, not just soldiers. Hired guns, drifters. He is building a posse. Riley. He says he is coming to burn out the nest of rats." "Crowley?" Riley whispered, his face turning the color of ash. "He cannot bring a posse onto Comanche land. It is an act of war." "He does not care about the law," Evelyn said. Her voice was clear, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. She walked down the steps, her skirts trailing in the dust. "He believes he is the law, and he believes I am his property. He will burn this whole place to the ground to get his property back." The men looked at her. The mockery was gone from their faces, replaced by fear. A private domestic dispute was one thing. A rogue captain with a posse of killers was another. "You have to leave," a cowboy muttered. "Take a horse and go, lady, before you get us all killed." Evelyn looked at the faces around her. Fear, resentment, self-preservation. She looked at Red Hawk. He was standing over O'Malley, his face a mask of stone. He did not look at the cowboys. He looked at the horizon, toward the east, where the sky was darkening into twilight. That night, a light rain began to fall, tapping softly against the tin roof of the outpost. It was a mournful sound. Evelyn found Red Hawk on the porch. He was sharpening his knife, the rhythmic shh of steel against stone, the only sound in the night. He did not look up as she sat down on the bench beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. "They are right," Evelyn said softly. "I should go. If I leave tonight, I can draw him away from the outpost. He will follow my tracks." Red Hawk stopped sharpening. He tested the edge of the blade with his thumb. A thin line of red appeared on his skin. "If you run," he said, "he catches you in 2 days. He brings you back to the fort. He beats you until you cannot walk. And then he locks the door." "At least no one here dies," Evelyn said. Red Hawk turned to her. In the darkness, his eyes were luminous. "People die every day," he said. "They die for land. They die for gold. They died because they drank too much whiskey and fell off a horse. It is a poor way to die." He sheathed the knife. "But to die fighting for your own blood, for your right to stand on the earth and say no?" Red Hawk leaned forward. "That is a good death. That is a warrior's death." "I am not a warrior, Red Hawk," Evelyn whispered. "I am a cook." "You are what you choose to be," he replied. "Tomorrow, Silas comes. If you want to go, I will give you my best horse. I will cover your tracks for 5 miles. He paused, and his voice softened, losing its hard edge. "But if you stay, if you choose to stand, then you are not just a cook, and you are not his wife. You are Evelyn." He stood up, looking down at her. "Decide," he said. "But decide for yourself. Not for Riley, not for me." He walked out into the rain, heading toward the camp of his people, leaving Evelyn alone on the porch. She looked at her hands. She flexed her fingers. The bruises were fading, but the memory of the pain was not. She thought of the stairs. She thought of the way Silas smiled when she cried. Then she thought of the salve on Red Hawk's fingers. She thought of the heat in the storage room. She thought of the way he had looked at her scar, not with disgust, but with fury at the man who made it. Evelyn Pike stood up. She walked into the kitchen. She took the heavy iron skillet down from the shelf. She placed it on the table. Next to it, she placed the sharpest butcher knife she owned. She was done running. The storm was coming, But this time, she would be the lightning, not the tree that split. The midday sun beat down on Half Moon Crossing like a hammer on an anvil. The air was still, suffocatingly hot, and silent save for the buzzing of horseflies and the distant, rhythmic creak of the windmill. It was a silence that felt heavy, pregnant with a violence that had been riding toward them for days. Evelyn Pike stood in the center of the kitchen. She had stopped chopping vegetables 10 minutes ago. Her hands were pressed flat against the rough pine table, grounding herself. She could hear the horses before she saw them, the heavy, arrogant thud of shod hooves that sounded nothing like the unshod ponies of the Comanche. "They are here," Jonah whispered from the window. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide and dark. He clutched an old Henry rifle that looked too big for his slender frame. "Go to the roof, Jonah," Evelyn said. Her voice was strange to her own ears, hollow, yet steady. "Do not shoot unless they shoot first. Do not let them see you." Jonah hesitated, looking at her with a desperate loyalty. "I will not let him take you. Evelyn!" "Go," she commanded, sharper this time. As the boy scrambled up the ladder to the loft, the front door of the trading post swung open. The bell above it jangled, a cheerful sound that felt obscene in the tension. Tom Riley's voice drifted back, shrill and trembling. "Now, see here, Captain. We do not want any trouble. This is a place of business." "Then bring me my business, Riley," a voice replied. It was a voice that made the blood in Evelyn's veins turn to ice water, smooth, cultured, with a jagged edge of cruelty beneath the polish. It was the voice that had whispered endearments in the dark and shouted insults in the light. Captain Silas Crowley had arrived. Evelyn walked to the doorway that separated the kitchen from the main room. She did not hide. She would not give him the satisfaction of dragging her out from under a table. Through the haze of dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight, she saw him. Silas sat atop a magnificent bay gelding right in the center of the yard. Having ridden through the open gates, he looked every inch the conqueror. He wore a dusty blue military coat, unbuttoned at the collar to reveal a white shirt that was impossibly clean. His blonde hair was swept back, his mustache waxed. He smiled, a tightening of the lips that did not reach his pale, flat eyes. Flanking him were 5 men. They were not soldiers. They were hard-faced men in long dusters, with low-slung holsters and eyes that assessed the trading post like wolves looking at a sheep pen, hired guns. "Evelyn," Silas said. He did not shout. He spoke her name as if he were calling a wayward child to supper. "Come out, my dear. You have had your little holiday. It is time to go home." Tom Riley stood on the porch, wringing his hands. Sweat stained the armpits of his shirt. "Captain, please, the treaty. The Comanche are nearby. We cannot have a scene." "There will be no scene, Riley," Silas said, swinging his leg over the saddle and dropping to the ground. His boots crunched on the gravel. "I am merely collecting my property. A man has a right to his wife. Even the savages understand property rights." Silas took a step toward the porch. His hand rested casually on the pearl handle of the Colt revolver at his hip. "Stop!" The word was not loud, but it carried the weight of a stone slide. Red Hawk stepped out from the shadows of the stable. He moved into the sunlight, placing himself directly between Silas and the steps of the trading post. He was stripped to the waist, his chest painted with a single stripe of black ochre. He held no rifle, only his bow in one hand and a knife at his belt. Silas stopped. He looked the warrior up and down with a sneer of distaste. "Move aside, Red Hawk. This is white man's business. It does not concern the tribe." "You stand on Comanche land," Red Hawk said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating with a controlled fury. "You bring armed men. You bring threats. This concerns the tribe." Silas laughed, a short, barking sound. "Land! You think you own this dust? I have killed enough of your kind to know that you only own what you can hold, and looking at you, one man with a stick and a string, you cannot hold much." Silas's men chuckled, their hands hovering near their guns. "I have killed 10 men for every feather in your hair," Silas boasted, stepping closer, invading Red Hawk's personal space. "I burned the villages at Pebble Creek. I chased the Apache into the rocks. Do not think I will hesitate to put a bullet in a stray dog that barks at me." Red Hawk did not flinch. He did not step back. His muscles coiled beneath his skin, tight as bowstrings. He knew the game Silas was playing. The captain wanted Red Hawk to strike first. If Red Hawk attacked a white officer, even a rogue one, it would bring the full force of the army down on his people. It would justify a massacre. Red Hawk held his ground, his eyes dark and unyielding. "Your words are wind," he said. "You are not here for war. You are here because you cannot control a woman." The insult landed. Silas's face went rigid. The smile vanished. "Bring her out, Riley," Silas roared, his composure cracking. "Or I will burn this shack to the ground with you inside it." Tom Riley panicked. He turned toward the dark interior of the store. "Evelyn misses. Pike, please, for the love of God, just go with him. Do not get us all killed." Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. The sunlight hit her face, blinding her for a moment. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the glare. She wore her gray dress, stained with flour and grease, her sleeves buttoned to her wrists. She looked tired, but she stood straight. "Hello, Silas," she said. Silas looked up at her. His eyes raked over her body, possessive and hungry. "Look at you," he sneered. "Dressed like a beggar, cooking for trash. Is this what you wanted? Evelyn, to live in the dirt." "I would rather live in the dirt than in your house," she said clearly. Silas's face turned a mottled red. He marched up the steps, brushing past Red Hawk, who tensed but held his position, his eyes flicking to the gunmen who had raised their rifles. Silas reached the top of the stairs. Riley scrambled out of the way. "You ungrateful bitch," Silas hissed. He reached out and grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her left bicep. His grip was iron hard. By cruel chance or malicious instinct, his thumb pressed directly into the center of the deep, purple bruise that was just beginning to yellow at the edges. Pain shot up Evelyn's arm, white-hot and sickening. She froze. For a second, she was back in the parlor of their home at the fort, the smell of his bay rum cologne, the stench of stale whiskey, the look of pure, unadulterated rage in his eyes. Her body remembered the script. Freeze, submit, endure. If you do not fight, it ends sooner. "You are coming with me," Silas growled, yanking her toward the stairs. "And when we get home, I will teach you the meaning of obedience so thoroughly you will never walk straight again." He pulled her. Her boots skidded on the wood. She was slipping back into the role of the victim, the rabbit caught in the trap. Red Hawk turned, his hand moving to his knife. "Let her go." "Back off, savage," one of the gunmen shouted, cocking his pistol. Silas ignored them all. He had her. He yanked her again, harder this time, shaking her like a rag doll. And then something snapped. It was not a bone. It was a chain inside Evelyn's mind, the chain that had held her fear in check, the chain that had bound her to the identity of a battered wife. She looked at the back of Silas's head. She felt the agony in her arm, and she realized, with a clarity that was as sharp as a diamond, that she would rather die on this porch than go back to him. "No." The word rose in her throat, primal and fierce. As Silas yanked her forward, Evelyn did not pull back. She threw her weight forward, stepping into him. She brought her knee up, driving it with every ounce of strength she possessed into his groin. Silas's eyes bulged. His mouth opened in a silent O of shock and pain. His grip on her arm loosened. Evelyn did not stop. She twisted her body, raised her right elbow, and drove it into his nose with a sickening crunch. "K.A." The shout tore from her throat. It was the Comanche word for no. It was the word Red Hawk had used when he stopped a horse. It was a command. It was a rejection. Silas stumbled back, blood streaming from his nose, Clutching his groin, he fell to his knees on the porch steps, looking up at her with disbelief. The silence that followed lasted for the space of a single heartbeat. Then, chaos exploded. "Kill them!" Silas screamed, spitting blood. The gunman nearest the trough raised his Colt, aiming directly at Evelyn. Red Hawk moved. He did not look human. He was a blur of motion. He launched himself from the ground, vaulting the porch rail. He did not go for Silas. He went for Evelyn. "Down!" Red Hawk roared. He slammed into her, his shoulder hitting her waist, tackling her to the hard wood of the porch floor just as the air cracked with the sound of a gunshot. A bullet bit into the wood where Evelyn's head had been a second before, sending splinters flying. Red Hawk covered her body with his own. He was heavy, a wall of solid muscle and heat. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, the smell of dust and Red Hawk's skin filling her nose. Crack! A second shot rang out, but this one came from above. The gunman who had fired at Evelyn jerked backward, his hat flying off, a red hole appearing in his shoulder. He collapsed into the dust. "Jonah!" Evelyn gasped, recognizing the boom of the heavy buffalo gun. Red Hawk rolled off her, dragging her toward the cover of the stacked flour barrels. "Stay down. Do not move." The yard erupted into a storm of lead. Silas's remaining 4 men scrambled for cover behind the water trough and the wagon. Bullets chewed up the front of the trading post, shattering the window, sending glass cascading onto the porch. Red Hawk rose to a crouch. He drew his bow. He did not fire blindly. He waited for a heartbeat, watching the wagon. A head popped up. Thwip! An arrow flew, silent and deadly. It took the man in the forearm, pinning his sleeve to the wagon wood. The man screamed, dropping his rifle. Then, from the ridges surrounding the outpost, a new sound joined the fray. It was a high-pitched, ululating war cry that made the hair on Evelyn's arms stand up. 5 Comanche warriors appeared on the skyline. They did not charge. They simply raised their rifles and fired a synchronized volley into the dust around Silas's men. It was not a massacre. It was a statement of overwhelming force. "We are surrounded," one of the hired guns yelled, throwing his pistol into the dirt. "I am not dying for this. I am not dying for $20. He ran toward his horse. The others wavered. Silas, still on his knees, wiped blood from his face. He fumbled for his dropped pistol. His eyes were wild, maniacal. He was not looking at the Comanche. He was looking at Evelyn, who was peering over the barrels. "If I cannot have you," Silas screamed, raising the gun, "no one will." He leveled the revolver at her. There was no time for Jonah to reload, no time for the warriors on the ridge to aim. Red Hawk saw the turn of Silas's wrist. He knew he could not reach Silas in time to stop the shot. So he stepped in front of it. He lunged across the gap, shielding Evelyn with his body just as the gun flashed. Evelyn felt the impact. It was not on her. It was a dull thud against the body pressing into hers. Red Hawk jerked, a sharp hiss of air escaping through his teeth. "Red Hawk!" she screamed. He did not fall. He used the momentum to crash into Silas, knocking the gun from his hand. The 2 men went down in a tangle of limbs on the dusty porch. But it was not a fight. It was an execution of dominance. Red Hawk was younger, stronger, and fueled by a rage that burned cleaner than Silas's desperation. He pinned Silas to the floorboards. His left shoulder was bleeding freely, a jagged tear where the bullet had grazed the muscle, but he seemed not to feel it. Red Hawk drew his knife. The blade glinted in the sun. He pressed the tip against Silas's throat, right beneath Adam's apple. "Do not," Tom Riley shouted from the doorway. "If you kill him, the army will come." The yard went silent. The hired guns had fled or surrendered. The Comanche warriors stood on the ridge, silent sentinels. The dust settled slowly. Silas lay panting, his nose broken, blood matting his blonde hair. He stared up at the Indian warrior, his eyes filled with hate, but also with fear. the cold, metallic fear of a man who realizes he is mortal. Red Hawk's hand was steady. A single drop of blood welled up where the knife point touched the skin. Evelyn crawled out from behind the barrels. Her dress was torn. Her hair was wild. She looked at Red Hawk's shoulder, at the blood running down his arm, blood shed for her. "Red Hawk," she said softly. He did not look at her. His eyes were locked on Silas. "He deserves to die. He is a dog who bites the hand that feeds him." "Yes," Evelyn said. She stood up. Her legs shook, but she forced them to hold her. "He deserves to die, but if you kill him, he becomes a martyr, and you become a murderer." She walked over to them. She looked down at the husband who had terrorized her for 5 years. He looked pathetic now. Broken nose, dirt on his fine shirt, pinned by a man he considered a savage. "Let him up," Evelyn said. Red Hawk hesitated. Then, slowly, he pulled the knife back. He grabbed Silas by the collar and hauled him to his knees. He did not let go. He forced Silas to face the yard, to face Tom Riley, the remaining drovers who had come out to watch, and the terrified hired guns. "Look at him," Evelyn said, turning to the crowd. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. She stepped forward. She did not fix her hair. She did not smooth her dress. Instead, she reached for the buttons on her left sleeve. Her fingers were steady. 1 button, 2, 3. She pulled the sleeve up. She pulled it all the way to her shoulder. The sunlight hit her skin. The crowd gasped. The bruises were there, laid bare for the world to see. The yellowing fingerprints on her wrist. The dark purple clusters on her bicep. The ugly, mottled shape of a hand crushed into her flesh. "You called me a whore," Evelyn said to the cowboy who had mocked her days ago. She looked him in the eye until he looked away in shame. "You said I was loose. You said I ran away because I was weak." She pointed at the marks. "This is what Captain Silas Crowley gave me," she said. "This is his love. This is his marriage." She turned to Silas, who was refusing to look at her arm. Red Hawk jerked him roughly. "Look," Red Hawk commanded. Silas looked. He saw the marks of his own hands. He saw the evidence of his sins written on the skin of the woman he claimed to own. "Tell them," Evelyn said. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried, "Tell them what you did. Tell them why I ran." Silas remained silent, his jaw working. Red Hawk pressed the knife flat against Silas's cheek. "Speak." Silas choked. "I disciplined her." "No," Evelyn said. "You beat me. You kicked me. You treated me like a dog because you are small, because you are weak." The truth hung in the air, undeniable. The illusion of the dashing officer was shattered, replaced by the reality of a wife-beater. Evelyn let her sleeve fall. She did not button it. She no longer needed to hide. "Take him away," she said to Tom Riley. "Tie him up. Give him to the Army Patrol when they pass. Tell them he attacked a trading post on treaty land." Red Hawk shoved Silas forward. The captain collapsed into the dust, defeated not by a bullet, but by the exposure of his own smallness. Tom Riley and the blacksmith rushed forward to bind his hands with rope. Red Hawk stood on the porch. He was breathing hard. Blood dripped from his shoulder, staining his leggings. Evelyn turned to him. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a trembling that started in her knees and spread to her hands. She looked at the blood on his chest. She reached out, her hand hovering over the wound. "You are hurt," she whispered. Red Hawk did not look at the wound. He looked at her face. He looked at her eyes, which were dry and fierce. "It is a scratch," he said. "You took a bullet for me," Evelyn said. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He had shielded her. He had offered his life for hers. Red Hawk reached out with his uninjured hand. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smear of dust. His touch was hot, electric. "I told you," he said, his voice rasping with the aftermath of violence. You are here to cook, but you chose to stay. You chose to fight." "I did not run," Evelyn said, wondering, filling her voice. She looked at the bound form of Silas being dragged toward the stable. "I stood still, and I am still alive." "You are alive," Red Hawk confirmed. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers for a brief, stolen moment in the chaos. "And you are free." Evelyn closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him blood, sweat, and the iron tang of adrenaline. She was shaking, tears finally spilling over her lashes. But they were not tears of fear. They were the tears of a prisoner who had just walked out of the dungeon and seen the sun for the first time. She had fought, she had bled, and she had won. The dust from the confrontation had settled, but the air at Half Moon Crossing remained thick with a tension that tasted of gunpowder and fear. The physical scars of the battle were small, but stark. A window in the main trading room was shattered, the jagged glass catching the dying light of the afternoon sun. A barrel of flour had been punctured by a stray bullet, leaking a white stream onto the porch floorboards like dry blood. A scorch mark blackened the wood of the railing where a lantern had been overturned in the chaos. Tom Riley paced the length of the porch, his boots crunching on the broken glass. He looked like a man whose world had tilted on its axis and refused to right itself. "They will come back," Riley muttered, wiping his face with a handkerchief that was already soaked with sweat. "The army, the marshals. You cannot just humiliate a captain of the cavalry, tie him to a horse, and send him packing without consequences. They will burn us out. Red Hawk, they will say we started a rebellion." Red Hawk sat on the edge of the water trough, ignoring the trader. He was pressing a wad of cloth against his left shoulder. The fabric was dark and heavy with blood. The bullet had not shattered the bone, but it had torn a deep, ugly furrow through the muscle of his deltoid. The pain was a dull, throbbing roar. But Red Hawk's face remained a mask of indifference. "He violated the treaty," Red Hawk said calmly. "He brought armed men onto Comanche land to steal a woman. The fort commander will not want a war over a domestic dispute. They will silence Silas to keep the peace." "You hope!" Riley snapped. He looked at the few remaining drovers who were hurriedly packing their saddlebags. "Look at them. They are leaving. Business is dead. Half Moon Crossing is finished." Evelyn stood by the door. She heard Riley's lamentations, but they sounded distant, like the buzzing of a fly against a window pane. Her reality had narrowed down to the man sitting on the trough, the man who had bled for her. She walked down the steps. Her legs felt heavy, the adrenaline crash leaving her trembling, but her mind was clear. She stopped in front of Red Hawk. "You need to clean that," she said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the deference she used to show men. Red Hawk looked up at her. His eyes were dark, rimmed with fatigue. "It will heal." "It will rot if the lead dust is not washed out," Evelyn countered. "And I will not have you lose an arm because you are too stubborn to accept help." Red Hawk studied her face. He saw the change in her. The woman who had flinched in the shadows was gone. In her place was someone who stood with her shoulders back, her hands steady despite the tremors in her knees. "Not here," Red Hawk said. He glanced at Riley and the departing traders. Too many eyes, too much fear. He stood up, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at the wound. "Come!" It was not a command given to a servant. It was an invitation to an equal. They rode less than 2 miles, but it felt like crossing an ocean. Red Hawk led her away from the outpost, following the twist of the dry creek bed until the land opened up into a small, sheltered depression shaded by cottonwood trees. This was his camp. It was not the main village, which was miles further west, but a scout's outpost. A solitary lodge made of buffalo hide stood near the water, flanked by a smoking fire pit and a drying rack hung with strips of venison. Evelyn slid down from the horse. The air here was different. It did not smell of commerce and old whiskey. It smelled of wood smoke, cured leather, and the pungent, clean scent of sagebrush. She followed Red Hawk into the lodge. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through the thick hide walls, turning the air a warm, amber gold. The ground was covered in furs. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the lodge poles, filling the space with a wild, earthy aroma. A shield made of tough rawhide, painted with a red hawk symbol, rested against a cedar chest. It was an intensely private space. Evelyn felt like an intruder. Yet as Red Hawk sat on a pile of buffalo robes and gestured for her to sit, she realized she was the first white person to ever see the inside of this world. "The water skin is there," Red Hawk said, nodding toward a leather pouch, "and the pouch with the blue beads. Inside is the yarrow and bear fat." Evelyn moved automatically. She poured water into a wooden bowl. She found the medicine pouch. She knelt beside him. "I need to take the shirt off," she said. Red Hawk nodded. He did not help her. He let her do it. Evelyn's fingers fumbled slightly with the leather ties of his leggings, then moved to the sash that held his breechcloth and the remains of his torn shirt. She peeled the fabric away from the wound. The skin was hot to the touch. The bullet graze was angry and red, oozing fresh blood. She dipped a clean cloth into the water. "This will sting." "Do it," Red Hawk grunted. She pressed the cloth to the wound. His muscles bunched under her hand, hard as iron, but he did not make a sound. She cleaned the blood away, her movements gentle but firm. As she worked, the intimacy of the moment settled over them like a heavy blanket. She was inches away from him. She could feel the heat radiating from his bare chest. She could see the rhythm of his breathing, the way his ribs expanded and contracted. She applied the yarrow salve, her fingers slick with the grease. She had to lean in close to bind the wound with strips of clean linen. Her cheek brushed against his uninjured shoulder. Her hair, which had come loose from its pins during the fight, fell forward, curtaining them off from the rest of the lodge. Unconsciously, her other hand rested on his stomach to steady herself. Her fingers splayed across the ridges of his abdominal muscles. His skin was smooth, hairless save for a faint line trailing down from his navel. Red Hawk sucked in a breath. It was a sharp, audible sound. Evelyn froze. She realized where her hand was. She realized that she was touching him not as a nurse, but as a woman. The texture of his skin was fascinating, alive, resilient, utterly unlike the doughy softness of Silas. She began to pull her hand away. "I am sorry." Red Hawk's hand shot out and caught her wrist. He did not push her away. He held her hand there, pressed against his skin. His grip was firm, but not painful. "Do not apologize," he said. His voice was rough, dropping to a register that vibrated in her own chest. "You have spent too long apologizing for existing." He looked down at her arm. Her sleeve was rolled up to the elbow, revealing the fading bruises and the one fresh, dark mark where Silas had grabbed her earlier that day. Red Hawk released her wrist and traced the line of the new bruise with his thumb. "He marked you again," Red Hawk said, his eyes darkening with a residual flare of violence. "It is just a bruise," Evelyn whispered. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "It will fade." "It is not shameful," Red Hawk said fiercely, looking into her eyes. "Do not hide it. A warrior carries scars to show he survived the battle. You survived. Evelyn, these are your coup marks." Evelyn looked at the ugly purple stain on her white skin. For 5 years, she had looked at these marks and seen only her own failure. Her failure to please, her failure to be a good wife, her failure to be strong. But looking at it now, through Red Hawk's eyes, she saw something else. She saw the moment she had said no. She saw the price of her freedom, and, for the first time, she was willing to pay it. "I was so afraid," she confessed, her voice trembling. "When he grabbed me, I felt like I was back in the hallway. I felt small." "Fear is the wind," Red Hawk said. He leaned closer. His face was so near that his breath ghosted across her lips. "It blows over the grass, but the grass has roots. You have roots now." The air in the lodge grew heavy, charged with a magnetism that was undeniable. Evelyn looked at his mouth. It was a stern mouth, usually set in a grim line, but now the corners were softened. She wanted to bridge the gap. She wanted to know what he tasted like. But panic flared in her chest, not fear of him, but fear of herself. Fear of the overwhelming need that was rising in her blood. She pulled back, breathless. I cannot." Red Hawk did not pursue her. He did not try to coax or convince. He simply sat back, giving her the space she needed. "I am afraid," Evelyn whispered, looking at her hands. "I am afraid that if I let myself want this, want you, I will just be trading one cage for another. I do not want to belong to anyone ever again." Red Hawk remained silent for a long moment. He picked up the water bowl and took a drink, his eyes never leaving her face. "Among my people," he said slowly, "a woman belongs to herself. She chooses her husband, and if he strikes her, or if he is lazy, or if her heart changes, she puts his belongings outside the lodge door, and the marriage is over, just like that." He set the bowl down. "I do not want to own you. Evelyn, I do not want a prisoner. I want a woman who stands beside me because she chooses to stand there." He gestured to the door of the lodge, where the twilight was turning the sky to violet. "The door is open," Red Hawk said. "If you want to go back to the crossing, I will take you. If you want to go east, I will give you a horse. If you want to stay, that is your choice, not mine." Evelyn looked at the open flap. The freedom he offered was terrifying. It was absolute. There were no rules, no contracts, no societal expectations to bind her, just her own will. "I will stay," she whispered, "for tonight." Red Hawk nodded. It was enough. The next morning, the sun rose over the plains with a brilliance that seemed to scrub the world clean. The air was crisp and cool. Evelyn woke up on a pile of furs on the opposite side of the lodge. Red Hawk was already gone. She stepped outside. He was sitting by the fire, sharpening his knife. He nodded to her, then pointed toward the creek that ran behind the cottonwoods. "The water is cold," he said, "but it is clean." Evelyn understood. She needed to wash. She needed to scrub the dust of the fight, the smell of Silas's fear, and the residue of her old life from her skin. She took a bar of lye soap from her pocket, one she had brought from the outpost, and walked down to the water. The creek was shallow, running clear over smooth river stones. The banks were lined with tall willows that offered a veil of privacy. Evelyn stripped off her ruined dress. She removed her chemicals and bloomers. She stood naked in the morning light, the cool air raising goose flesh on her skin. She waded into the water. It was freezing, a shock to the system that made her gasp. She ducked under, letting the current rush over her head, her hair floating out like seaweed. She scrubbed her skin with the soap, scrubbing hard, as if she could scour away the memory of every time Silas had touched her. She washed her arm, watching the soap suds turn gray with dirt as they ran over the bruises. When she surfaced, pushing her hair back from her face, she saw him. Red Hawk was standing on the ridge above the creek, his back to her. He held his rifle loosely in the crook of his arm. He was guarding her. He was not watching her bathe. He was watching the horizon, ensuring that no one interrupted her vulnerability. Evelyn stood in the water, waist deep, water dripping from her chin. She looked at his broad back, the bandage on his shoulder stark white against his skin. A strange sensation bloomed in her chest. It was peaceful. For the first time in 5 years, she was naked and she was safe. She finished bathing and dressed in the spare clothes she had brought, a simple calico skirt and a white blouse. She braided her wet hair. When she walked back up the bank, Red Hawk turned. He looked at her. His eyes swept over her wet hair, her scrubbed face, her clean clothes. He did not say a word, but the heat in his gaze was palpable. It was a look of raw hunger, but it was leashed, held in check by a profound respect for her boundaries. "You look like the morning," Red Hawk said. Evelyn felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but she did not look away. I feel new. They returned to the main Comanche camp later that day. It was a temporary settlement. 20 lodges arranged in a circle near a larger river. The reception was not warm. As they rode in, warriors stopped their tasks to watch. Women looked up from their beadwork, their faces guarded. To them, Evelyn was Tyvo white enemy. She was a symbol of the encroachment that was destroying their world. A young warrior, tall and arrogant, stepped into Red Hawk's path. Why do you bring this trouble to our fire, Red Hawk? The warrior demanded in Comanche. She belongs to the white soldiers. Let them have her. She will only bring sickness and whiskey. Red Hawk stiffened on his horse, ready to argue, but a voice cut through the tension like a cracked whip. Move aside, you foolish boy. An elderly woman emerged from a lodge. She was tiny, her face a map of 1,000 wrinkles, her hair to 2 long braids of silver. She walked with a cane made of willow, but she moved with the authority of a general. This was Auntie Running Fawn, the matriarch of Red Hawk's clan. She marched up to the young warrior and whacked him on the shin with her cane. You speak of trouble. You bring more trouble with your gambling than this woman brings with her silence. She turned her sharp, black eyes on Evelyn. She walked around the horse, inspecting Evelyn like one might inspect a brood mare. She is skinny, Running Fawn declared in broken English. Too skinny, but she has strong hands. The old woman looked at Red Hawk. Does she cook? She cooks, Red Hawk said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. She makes bread that does not break teeth. Good, Running Fawn grunted. Then she stays. We have enough men who know how to shout and shoot guns. We do not have enough people who know how to make a decent stew. She waved her cane at the staring tribe members. Go back to work, the show is over. With that, the tension broke. The tribe did not embrace Evelyn, but they accepted Running Fawn's decree. Evelyn had a place, low in the hierarchy, but a place nonetheless. Over the next 2 weeks, a strange, fragile domesticity began to form at Half Moon Crossing, where Evelyn returned to work during the day, often accompanied by Red Hawk and Jonah. Jonah, the boy caught between 2 worlds, found the situation endlessly amusing. I have never seen him so quiet, Jonah said one afternoon as he chopped wood behind the kitchen. And Red Hawk is a quiet man, but around you he is like a stone that is afraid to roll. Evelyn was peeling potatoes, sitting on the back steps. He is just respectful. Jonah. Respectful, Jonah laughed. Evelyn, he looks at you like a starving man looks at a feast he is afraid is poisoned. He wants to eat, but he does not want to die. Evelyn threw a potato skin at him. Hush! But Jonah was right. The air between them was constantly charged. They moved around each other in the kitchen, passing salt, passing knives, their hands brushing, their eyes meeting. It was a courtship of silence and small services. Red Hawk brought her the best cuts of meat. Evelyn mended his shirts, her stitches neat and strong. They were a family of strays, a battered woman, a lonely warrior, and a half-caste boy. They fit together in the jagged, improvised way that broken things sometimes do. But the shadow of the outside world was lengthening. News arrived with a dispatch rider from the fort. Silas Crowley had been court-martialed not for beating his wife, of course, but for unauthorized use of military resources and inciting a skirmish on treaty land. He had been transferred to a regiment in the Dakota Territory, far away to the north. Evelyn was safe from him. But the rider brought other news. The policy of the United States government was shifting. The peace policy was ending. The order was coming down. All Comanche bands were to report to the reservation at Fort Sill within 3 moons. Those who refused would be considered hostile and hunted down. That night, Evelyn sat by the fire in the kitchen, the dispatch letter resting on her lap. The paper felt heavy, like a stone. Red Hawk stood by the window, looking out at the darkness. Silas is gone, Evelyn said softly. You kept your promise. The wolf is gone, Red Hawk said, not turning around. But the winter is coming. He meant the army. He meant the end of his way of life. What will you do? Evelyn asked. The question hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. I will not go to the cage. Red Hawk said, I will go to the Palo Duro Canyon. The canyons are deep. The horses can hide there. He turned to look at her. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face. But it is a hard life. Evelyn, we will be hunted. There will be no flour for bread, no roof but skins, cold in the winter, hunger in the spring. Evelyn looked down at her hands. The bruises were almost gone now, just faint yellow smudges. If I stay here, she said, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her, I am just a woman alone at a trading post. Without you, without the fear of the Comanche protecting this place. How long before another Silas comes? How long before the soldiers look at me and see only prey? You are not prey anymore, Red Hawk said fiercely. I am safe because I am with you. Evelyn corrected him. I am safe because I stood behind your shield. You stood beside it, Red Hawk corrected her. He walked over to her and knelt, taking her hands in his. His palms were rough, warm, and real. The choice is harder now, he said. Before, it was run or die. Now, it is comfort or freedom. If you come with us, you will be cold. You will be tired. You will be an outcast to your own race. And if I stay? Evelyn asked, tears prickling her eyes. If you stay, Red Hawk said, his voice cracking slightly, you will be warm. You will be safe. But I will not be there to eat your bread. Evelyn looked at him. She thought of the soft beds in the east. She thought of the safety of a town. Then she thought of the way the sun looked rising over the canyon, the smell of sage on his skin, and the feeling of the wind on her face when she rode beside him. She realized that comfort was not the same thing as happiness. She had been comfortable in Silas's house, surrounded by silk and china, and she had been dying by inches. Here, amidst the dust and the danger, she had found a reason to breathe. I do not like the cold, Evelyn whispered, a small, sad smile touching her lips. Red Hawk's face fell. He began to pull his hands away. But, Evelyn continued, tightening her grip on his fingers, I think I would hate the warmth if I had to endure it without you. Red Hawk froze. Hope, bright and painful, flared in his eyes. Are you sure? He asked. There is no turning back. I am done turning back, Evelyn said. I am looking forward to it. Outside, the wind howled around the corners of the trading post, a lonely, wild sound. But inside, by the dying fire, the pact was sealed. The family of strays would face the coming winter together. The dust of the conflict had barely settled when the law arrived, not in the form of a vengeful posse, but in the crisp, bureaucratic uniform of a young lieutenant from Fort Conco. He rode into Half Moon Crossing with a small escort, his posture rigid, his face unlined by the cruelty that had defined Silas Crowley. Evelyn stood on the porch, her hands clasped in front of her apron. Beside her, Red Hawk leaned against the support post, his bandaged shoulder a stark reminder of the violence that had just passed. Lieutenant James Miller, the officer introduced himself. Touching the brim of his hat, he looked from Tom Riley to Evelyn, then to the silent Comanche warrior. I am here to confirm the status of Captain Crowley. He is gone, Tom Riley said quickly, eager to wash his hands of the affair. We sent him back on a wagon 2 days ago, tied up, as was necessary for the safety of the post. The lieutenant nodded, pulling a leather folio from his saddlebag. The colonel has reviewed the reports. Captain Crowley has been relieved of his command pending a court-martial. He has been reassigned to a supply depot in the Dakota Territory. He will not be troubling this region again. Evelyn felt a weight lift from her chest, so heavy she hadn't realized she was carrying it until it was gone. Silas was not dead. But he was erased. He was a ghost sent to haunt a frozen wasteland far from her. "And Mrs. Pike?" the lieutenant asked, looking directly at her. "The captain claims you are his legal wife and property." Evelyn stepped forward. The wood of the porch felt solid beneath her boots. "I am Evelyn Pike. I am employed here as a cook. I am no one's property." "Lieutenant, if the captain wishes to contest that, he can come back and argue it with the man who put him on his knees." She gestured to Red Hawk. The lieutenant looked at the warrior, noting the obsidian eyes and the quiet, lethal confidence. He cleared his throat and closed the folio. "The Army has no interest in domestic disputes on treaty land," the officer said diplomatically. "As long as Half Moon Crossing remains peaceful and does not harbor fugitives, we will consider the matter closed. Good day to you." He turned his horse and rode out, the flag of the United States snapping in the wind. It was a tenuous peace, a legal loophole, but it was enough. That evening, the sky turned a bruised purple over the Llano Estacado. Red Hawk found Evelyn in the kitchen. She was packing dried beef into a sack. "The blue coats are gone," Red Hawk said. "For now," Evelyn replied. She did not look up. "But they will be back. The treaty is paper. Paper burns." "Yes," Red Hawk said. "That is why we are leaving." Evelyn stopped. She placed the beef on the table and turned to face him. "Leaving?" "The main tribe moves to the reservation at Fort Sill," Red Hawk explained. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a deep, quiet sorrow. "But a small band, my band, we go west, to the Palo Duro Canyon. The walls are high, the water is deep. The soldiers do not like the canyons." He moved a step closer to her. "It will be a hard life. Evelyn, we will hunt for our food. We will sleep on the earth. There will be no roof but the sky, and the winter winds cut like knives." He gestured around the kitchen, the warm stove, the sturdy walls, the shelves lined with jars. "You are safe here now. Riley needs a cook. The soldiers know you are free. You can stay here, close to the safety of your own kind. You can sleep in a bed and grow old in peace." He was giving her an out. He was opening the cage door and showing her the easy path. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at the scar on his shoulder, the dark hair framing his face, the hands that had applied salve to her burns with the tenderness of a healer. She walked past him, into the small back room where she slept. She pulled her trunk out from under the cot. Red Hawk watched her, his face impassive, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He thought she was packing to stay. Evelyn opened the trunk. Inside was a small leather bundle, the go bag she had kept ready for 5 years. It contained a few dollars, a knife, a change of socks, and a map. It was the symbol of her fear, her readiness to flee at the first sign of trouble. She picked up the bundle. She carried it back into the kitchen and placed it on the table between them. With steady fingers, she untied the leather thong. She reached inside. She pulled out a small, wooden ladle she had carved herself. She placed it on the table. Next, she pulled out a tattered Bible, the cover worn smooth by anxious fingers. She placed it next to the ladle. Finally, she pulled out a faded blue ribbon, a remnant of a childhood dress she had kept to remember a time before she was Captain Crowley's wife. She looked at Red Hawk. "I have spent 5 years packing to run away," Evelyn said softly. "I am tired of packing. Red Hawk, I am ready to unpack." She pushed the blue ribbon across the table toward him. "This goes in your lodge," she said. "Wherever you pitch it, that is where I will keep my memories." She picked up the wooden ladle. "And this," she said, gripping the handle, "goes in my belt, because wherever we go, people will need to eat." Red Hawk looked at the ribbon. He reached out and covered her hand with his own. His grip was warm, solid, anchoring her to the earth. "You choose the canyon," he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You choose the cold." "I choose the fire," Evelyn whispered. "And you are the fire." The next morning, the sun rose like a promise over the plains. A small caravan was assembled in the yard of Half Moon Crossing. There were 6 horses, laden with supplies, and 3 other Comanche riders waiting by the gate. Jonah sat atop his mule, grinning like a cat who had stolen the cream. "I told Riley I was quitting," Jonah announced as Evelyn walked out. "I told him his pay was bad and his coffee was worse. Besides, someone has to translate for you. Evelyn, your Comanche sounds like a duck choking on a frog." Evelyn laughed. It was a free, bright sound that startled even her. She adjusted the saddlebags on the mare Red Hawk had given her. She looked back at the trading post. It stood squat and brown against the sky. It had been a sanctuary, a battlefield, and a crucible. Now, it was just a building. Red Hawk rode up beside her. He wore a fresh shirt of buckskin, and his hair was braided with a strip of red cloth. He looked at her, checking her saddle, checking her boots, checking her eyes. "Lady," Red Hawk said, echoing the words he had spoken that first day in the kitchen, his voice holding a hint of a smile. "You are here only to cook." Evelyn looked up at him. The morning wind caught her hair, blowing it across her face. She pushed it back, revealing the faint, fading yellow marks on her wrist. "No," Evelyn said. She sat tall in the saddle. "I am here to live. I am here to love. And if I have to run, I run with you. I will not run from anyone ever again." Red Hawk guided his horse closer until their knees touched. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed across her skin. Reverent and slow. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. He waited. Evelyn leaned into his touch. She closed her eyes and nodded, a silent permission that was louder than a shout. Red Hawk leaned down. His lips brushed hers. It was not the frantic, stolen kiss of desperate lovers. It was the slow, deep kiss of 2 people who had walked through fire to find each other. It tasted of sage and coffee and the vast, terrifying freedom of the West. It was a kiss that promised nothing but the truth. When they pulled apart, breathless, the world seemed sharper. The grass was greener. The sky was bluer. "Pia," Red Hawk said, the Comanche word for mother or source. "Let us go home." He turned his horse toward the west, toward the jagged line of the horizon where the Badlands began. Evelyn kicked her mare into a trot, falling beside him. Jonah gave a whoop and followed, the pack horses stringing out behind them. Time moves differently on the plains. It is measured not in hours, but in seasons, in the movement of herds and the changing of the wind. 6 months later, the canyon floor was a hidden paradise of green willows and red rock walls that stretched up to touch the sky. A stream wound through the center, clear and cold. A camp was pitched near the water. It was a small camp, quiet and hidden from the patrols that scoured the plains above. In the center of the camp stood a unique structure. It was a lodge, but attached to the front was a brush arbor, creating a shaded open-air kitchen. A large iron pot, traded for with furs, hung over a steady fire. Evelyn stood by the fire. She wore a dress of soft deerskin, fringed at the hem, but she wore a calico apron over it. Her hair was braided in the Comanche style, woven with the faded blue ribbon. She stirred the stew, the smell of wild onions and venison filling the air. Her hands moved with confidence. The skin was no longer pale and translucent. It was browned by the sun, dusted with flour, and marked with the honest calluses of work. The bruises, the ugly purple fingerprints of Silas Crowley were gone. They had been erased by the sun and the wind, replaced by the strength of a woman who chopped her own wood and rode her own horse. Jonah sat on a rock nearby, teaching English words to a young Comanche girl. "Bread?" Jonah said. "Pan." "Bread," the girl repeated, giggling. Red Hawk rode into the camp. He had been hunting since dawn. He slid from his horse, handing the reins to Jonah. He carried 2 rabbits and a string of prairie hens. They walked to the fire. Evelyn looked up. Their eyes met. In that regard, There was history. There was the memory of a dusty kitchen, of a sandstorm, of a gunfight on a porch. But mostly, there was a profound, quiet peace. Red Hawk did not speak. He reached out and took her hand. He ran his thumb over her knuckles, feeling the roughness, the strength. He turned her hand over and kissed the palm, right where she had once held the skillet like a shield. "The pot is full," Evelyn said softly. "And the heart is full," Red Hawk replied. In the distance, the sound of a drum began to beat, a low, steady rhythm that echoed off the canyon walls. It was the heartbeat of the land. Some say love in the Wild West is like a sandstorm, violent, blinding, and brief. They say it destroys what it touches and leaves only wreckage behind. But for Evelyn and Red Hawk, love was the fire in the hearth. It was the smell of baking bread in a buffalo hide lodge. It was the sound of horses grazing in the moonlight. It was the hand that reached out not to take, but to hold. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. They knew the winter would be hard. They knew the world was changing, closing in around them like a tightening noose. But as Evelyn ladled the soup into a wooden bowl and handed it to the warrior who had given her back her life, she knew one thing for certain. She was not running. She was not hiding. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Evelyn and Red Hawk across the dusty plains of the Wild West. If this story touched your heart, or if you just love a good old-fashioned Western romance, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear where you are listening from. Are you in a busy city dreaming of open spaces? Or are you already out in the country? Please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, for more stories of adventure, love, and survival on the frontier. Don't forget to hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get discovered by more listeners. Your support means the world to me and helps keep the campfire burning. Until next time, happy trails.